Welcome to Coast View, the show that every single day celebrates the men and women who are making coastal Mississippi such a great place to live, work, and play. I'm going to throw Kyle a little bit of a curveball here because I forgot to tell him I wanted to do this at the beginning. But Kyle, you want to join me for just a second, if you don't mind? And what I want to talk about, if we're real quick, and then we'll move to our guest, who's Julian Rankin, the executive director for the Walter Anderson Museum of Art. But what I want to talk to Kyle about is that our friend Steve Azar, who has In a Mississippi Minute on SuperTalk, what a great show that is. If you're not tuned into that, you should. It's on Thursdays and Fridays. I think it's at 1, I think it is. But anyway, it's a terrific show. He talks to music and artists and songwriters and professional golfers and people that he's come across in his touring across the nation. And it's just a really good show. But anyway, he's a music and cultural ambassador for the state of Mississippi. He's been on Coast View many times. He and I have become really, really good friends. He's just an incredible guy. And he wrote a song that was commissioned by Governor Phil Bryant called One Mississippi. And well, anyway, there's been I used One Mississippi as the theme song for Super Talk Outdoors. And the good news is they introduced a bill. In fact, the Speaker of the House introduced a bill to make One Mississippi the state song for Mississippi. And it just zoomed through the House. And yesterday on the Gallo show, the Lieutenant Governor, Delbert Hoseman, said that it's a rocket ship going through the Senate. And it may become the new state song for Mississippi. But anyway, Kyle, I'm so happy for Steve. And I mean, first of all, it's a great song, but I'm also happy for Steve.
Yeah, I mentioned this before. It could not happen to a better person in the world. I mean, He's such a great guy, humble to the core. I'm really happy for him, and I hope it really. I mean, all roads lead to it's going to happen, as long as there's no crazy knuckleball, curveball.
And that can always happen, man.
Yeah, it is
no such thing as a sure deal. But here's what I want to encourage people to do: to go search YouTube, Steve Azar, A-Z-A-R, Steve Azar. He's the guy who did I Don't Have to Be Me Till Monday. Just a great song. And, Waiting on Joe, that it was like #1 video in country music for a good long time. Had Morgan Freeman at the beginning narrating that. Just a great video. But anyway, do Steve Azar One Mississippi, and you'll get this version that has kids from St. Joseph's School doing the chorus at the end, and it's just terrific. And also, if you're really interested in Steve, go do a search on YouTube. There's Something in the Water. There's Something in the Water, and it's a documentary about Steve working with the Kingsmen, who were made, obviously, B.B. King and his backup band. And he went to a really famous juke joint, and they created this documentary of all these guys getting together to write these songs that are all about Mississippi. And it's just a great documentary. It's called There's Something in the Water, and it's available on YouTube. But I'm happy for him, my friend. Aren't you, buddy?
I am too. I really can't wait to talk to him again about it. After it all happens, I'm sure we're going to talk to him.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. He's actually headed to Spain for 10 or 12 days. So he'll be in Barcelona and wherever else he's going to be. But I told him I'd keep him abreast of the changes as they occur. So he's a happy camper. Anyway, I thought you would like that update to at least the audience. And then let's turn over to my friend Julian Rankin and say, Julian, if you had a chance to hear that song One Mississippi.
I have, and I think it's an appropriate, choice, and certainly even the title itself goes to a lot of the things I talk about, which is that Mississippi is a cipher for really anything, everything. And so One Mississippi, not only within the state, we're all connected, but I think Mississippi has that cultural importance to the larger country, and so it's a great tribute to the state.
Yeah, he tried to. He didn't try. He did. He made sure that he divided Mississippi into 5 regions when he wrote the song. What's interesting about it, he met with the governor, and the very next morning the song was done. He said that the song wrote itself, and he called the governor and left a message on his answering machine. And he played it for him, and Governor loved it. And then they ultimately, obviously, he finished putting the finishing touches on it. They went to what is called the Governor Studio and did a video. That's a YouTube video that people can watch if they look it up on YouTube. But it's a guy who loves the Delta, loves the role that art and culture plays in the state, and he's just a really good spokesman for the state when he's outside the state doing all these fundraisers that he does. And of course he still tours and so on, still writes a lot of music. He's written like 1,000 songs. I think some of his best music is actually ahead of him. When you see the song that he wrote with let me remember his name, Cedric Burnside, the song called Cold Water. It's about a city, Coldwater in Mississippi, but it's really kind of an anthem for the pandemic, and it's just really a great song. And they did it, by the way, at the studio that Steve helped fund at Delta State, which is one of the most high-tech recording studios in the nation now. And actually an old basketball court where Steve used to play basketball. So it's just kind of interesting the way all these dots connect. Anyway, enough about that. We'll switch gears. I always enjoy spending time with you, Julian, because you've got such a great way of words in terms of understanding the way, as I mentioned about Steve a second ago, with art and culture and how it connects with community and how it creates a sense of place. Well, the Walter Anderson Museum has this incredibly important place to play in terms of a destination that people might go to. What I'm most impressed about is the work you do outside the museum to help create and build community, and a lot of that work. So we'll cover both of those today. So what's the latest inside the museum these days?
Well, certainly just kind of museum basics. We're putting up some new exhibitions as we speak. If you hear any beeping in the background, it would be some heavy machinery, taking things off the walls and putting new things on. I told them to be quiet, but we'll see. But yes, so new exhibitions coming on, and these are two pendant shows that kind of talk to each other. One's from an artist, Martha Kelly, who's out of Memphis, but certainly, Mississippi kind of claims Memphis. And so she's been is a printmaker and has been inspired by Anderson. So we have her prints, and then alongside a revisit to Walter Anderson's 1949 Brooklyn Museum show, which was to what we're speaking about, him sharing his block prints with New York and with the larger art world. And so we're telling that story. And these, of course, for those who've been watching Hometown on HGTV, there was recently an episode which featured the screen printing, which is taken from Anderson's 1940s block prints that the family still produces and that show up on, in this show and in homes across the South and the country. But people don't really know, not everyone at least, the real story behind those prints, how Anderson used linoleum from the shipbuilding industry and really pioneered these designs that he made specifically so that they could be shared across the generations. And so there's an exhibition on that too. So that'll all be opening up really in a couple of weeks. So at the end of at the end of next week, those will be on view.
Yeah, I had when I retired from the Sun Herald to go to Advanced Condé Nast, one of the presents they gave me was, I think it was certainly the block prints, but I'm trying to remember. I think it was maybe my birthday or my year or whatever, and it was distinguished in the block print, but just really terrific, and I'm very proud of it, I might add. But it was it's interesting to see how his art lives on. You and I have cut and sliced in every possible direction. But his travels around the world, his work in China, and how it influenced so much of what he was doing, and he was so prolific. But it's amazing that, I guess we'll be in a scenario, Julian, where people continue to discover him who've never heard about him before, and especially with the documentary out now and the book. The book is so incredible. That's going to introduce him to more people, but it's you're literally watching exponential learning take place, so exponential discovery taking place around Walter Anderson, aren't you?
Yeah, I just got messages, and we get them all the time, of people who whether they're again seeing him on a nationally syndicated HGTV show, or finding out about the documentary, which if all goes to plan is soon going to be in over 200 other markets, public television markets across the country. And so we've been seeing so much activity, as I know the family's shop realizations has been, from people outside of the state and even people who come here and they're always discovering the museum. I had one this morning who was telling me she just got back home to up north and was just remarking on how she had been changed by the work she'd seen on view. And to your point, and even back to the exhibitions that are coming up, this idea of it's not just Anderson stuck in time, it's the contemporary artists and the contemporary landscapes, the contemporary issues that we're all seeing right now, that he is giving us a rubric and a design for making sense of and for participating in. So that's really the magic of what we do today is doing things out in the world in the contemporary moment.
It's truly, truly incredible. And I'll tell you on the other side, a prediction that I made as it relates to the documentary and the book and the impact that I think it's going to have. But we'll talk about that on the other side. And we'll find out what's happening in your community building world as well in the second half of the show. So we'll see you after this break. Welcome back to Coast View. I have Julian Rankin, who's the executive director for the Walter Anderson Museum of Art. And when we went to break, we were talking about how there's been this exponential discovery of Walter Anderson around the country. And this documentary that was recently done is just one of the best. It's probably the best documentary on him that's been done so far. Family has contributed. Of course, Julian contributed. But it's a great telling of his story. It's a complex story that has a lot of twists and turns along the way and lots of influence. But you can't watch it and not leave with a true sense of this guy was an artistic genius in the way that he approaches art, and his ability to sort of connect with the landscape and the extent to which he connected with the landscape so that he could tell his story was just incredible. And it was shown well through that documentary. And then there's a accompanying book. And I can't help but think about George Orr and how, someone doing a book about George Orr and, some folks in New York getting their hands on it. And one thing led to another. And what was this prolific potter who once did 10,000 pots, and then there was a fire and lots were destroyed. And then he did 10,000 more pots. But then, the mad potter of Biloxi. And then, here, long after he had passed, people began to discover his incredible ability to twist it and use a certain kind of mud. And it was just artistic, just incredibly genius what he did. And of course, people witnessed it and understood it. And, one pot could go for, tens of thousands of dollars. The same thing's going to happen with Walter Anderson. That's what I predict, because as you talk about going into other markets with that documentary, and then people start to get interested and collectors start to get interested, we know how that works. It doesn't take long for that word to travel very rapidly for people who are not now fans of Walter Anderson. You expect that, don't you?
Sure. And it's interesting because Anderson did, shirk the spotlight during his life. I mentioned, we talked a bit about him going to China. That was right on the heels of him being invited to appear in New York at this exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum. And he, of course, famously left a note on the cottage door that said "Gone to China" when his family came to get him for that show. So, it's interesting that he is as much of a genius as any artist that, was working at the time, but he was not interested so much in the spotlight. And I think that's interesting to think about, with Mississippians. We, of course, are world renowned for our arts and culture, but at the same time, a lot of the work that happens here is happening on a grassroots level. It's very tied to a locality. And if you think about the documentary, the people behind it, including Robert St. John, the restaurateur and developer and chef, and Anthony Thaxton, who was the filmmaker. But Robert St. John is he's an artist in his own right, thinking about what new businesses and entrepreneurial endeavors can be, transformed in certain places all across the state. So I think that's kind of the cool thing. It's back to this one Mississippi idea, is that when we talk about community building, Anderson and Orr and all these Mississippi legends are really inspiring what's contributing to the economic development of certainly the coast. And I was actually just the other night at Ground Zero Biloxi that had just opened their doors, the Blues Club that, it's at the bottom of the map here. The blues has migrated, from the Delta down the river, so to speak. And here we are, celebrating that, looking at the ocean and the sea. And you mentioned R.L. Burnside and Steve Azar, and it's all this musical tradition that's being shared with people who are coming to the coast, whether they're tourists or residents. And that's the thing. We export culture, not just abroad and across the world, but within our communities and to each other. And it continues to reinvent itself. And that's really the magic of of all of our creators in Mississippi and our constituents and communities is that there's a lot of potential everywhere you look.
I'm so honored and thankful that I had the opportunity to spend an entire Coast View show with Bill Luckett, Morgan Freeman's partner on the Ground Zero Blues Club, not long before he unfortunately died. And I really will always cherish it because we went into great detail about, here's Mississippi, produced the king of rock and roll and the father of country music and the king of blues and the impact that they had, the blues from Mississippi had on the Rolling Stones and the Beatles. And we talked at length about Robert Johnson and how his approach to blues music back in those days, how so many years later it impacted people like Eric Clapton and others. What I hope that the Ground Zero Blues Club in Biloxi becomes is not the Clarksdale version, but the Biloxi version, but that is still true to the history. Because I don't think people realize that there are actually blues markers in coastal Mississippi from the Blues Trail, which is one of the most incredibly innovative outdoor museums ever thought about. And now we have our place in history as it relates to that. I do believe, you see already in the early days, it's capturing some attention, isn't it?
It is, and it's really well done, and it echoes, of course, and is inspired by what's happening in Clarksdale, but it's not trying to reproduce it. I think that's what's important about many of these things is they're true to where they are. And, when we think about music, when we have concerts here, one of our signature annual concerts is with Luther Dickinson of the North Mississippi All-Stars. And when he comes down here and does a concert that pays homage to Walter Anderson's murals, he's pulling from the Hill Country Blues, but also from, the Mardi Gras Indian tradition and New Orleans jazz. And when you think about what the blues is, it really is a proto music for all of American music. And so it doesn't matter really what, whether this is R&B or hip hop or country music, everything is connected, back to those folk traditions, those early musical explorations that happened in the Mississippi Delta and across the state. And so that's what is happening in Biloxi. It's not going to be trying to reproduce exactly what's happening in Clarksdale, although those musicians will get to come down and share their talents with the world. But it's doing something that I think is going to be really unique to where it's located, and that's fun.
Well, it's really cool. I mean, you think about Keith Richards and Bob Dylan and Robert Plant, and a long list of people have been impacted. Mississippi has really had an incredible impact, and hopefully the Ground Zero Blues Club is not a Disney version of it, but really its own version of something that tells the story through its actions of how significant it is. And if it does that as the Clarksdale version did, it's going to be really, really popular for many, many years to come. Hey, real quick, we got a short period of time left. How's your community building activities going?
It's going great. I both in my capacity here at the museum and as a private citizen, a lot of things in the works. One thing I'll just mention, we've talked about this project before, but we're constructing large scale steel sculptures in Pascagoula. It's called the Pascagoula Public Art Enterprise. And this is where we're designing 3 steel sculptures that are designed and fabricated by career tech students at the high school there as part of the CCTI campus, Pascagoula Gaucher School District. And so I just wanted to kind of put a marker that later in March, we're going to be installing our first sculpture on Delmas Avenue and in downtown Pascagoula. And actually some new developments is some of the later sculptures, the next 2 are going to be used with repurposed steel from Ingalls. So Ingalls has come on board in a big way to help us use material. And that's a whole nother story to think about what that means, to have artists, student artists and others making work from this material that's used, for national security. So, stay tuned to what the museum's doing, not just in Ocean Springs, but beyond in all these other communities. And to what we talk about, it's really just about taking this seed of this legacy, this kind of pristine body of work that Anderson left us, and thinking about how it contributes and can inform all of our lives, regardless of what sector we work in or what our interests are, because these things are all connected in terms of our livelihoods and our families, our communities, and that's always going to be the case. And so when people think of the museum, I hope in the future they continue, as our campus expands, our programs expand, to look at us not just as a preservation institution that keeps the work alive and keeps it in existence, but one that really helps communities think creatively about how they can work together.
I love that idea. I see, when you think about Pascagoula and creating a historic district downtown and the mixed use that's coming together and the way that the, community leaders like Paige Roberts and Mayor Willis and all these people are working together to really create something downtown that operates at a very deep level. And what I mean by that, it's got a good, it's very thoughtful, and you're trying to connect, what that city is all about to its roots. And that art project does that in a cool way. And that's exciting to hear about the Ingles' involvement on that. So we'll have to talk more about that in the future for sure.
Yep, absolutely. And it's always great to share this with you. I think we need people to connect the dots. And that's the real capital, the natural resource that a lot of times, folks who aren't fortunate to live in a place that has such rich culture can miss, is that the authenticity comes from meaning making, from the paying homage to what came before, but really being authentic to what the needs of the community are. We don't have to be, Florida, Louisiana, or Alabama. Coastal Mississippi is its own thing. And I think the more that people see what's going on down here, the more they're going to want to be like us. But of course, they can't. We are our own thing. They are their own thing. And that's what makes us strong. And I look forward to all the partnerships and things that are in motion down here. And it really does take everybody just working together and being aware of all the opportunities that are in front of us.
I love the whole notion of meaning making, while also paying homage to those who came before us that have influenced kind of where we are, because it all adds up to create this unique sense of place. Pascagoula's sense of place different than Ocean Springs and different than Moss Point. I love what's going on in Moss Point today. I mean, got a new mayor and new excitement, a great river front scenario there. It's going to be really cool. You go all the way over to Bay St. Louis and all points in between. Even the mayor of Waveland, and in my conversation with him, they have a different set of challenges. They're still just as focused on creating a very special sense of place. When you add it all up, coastal Mississippi will be competitively strong and a very wonderful place to visit and work and play. So anyway, it's been great to talk to you, Julian. We'll chat with you soon.